Yeah.
Everyone. Yes, it's Dr. Tamara Beckford with Your Caring Docs and our Docs Who Cares podcast. Today is going to be juicy. It's going to be intimate because I have the intimacy doctor and we are going to go all in on relationships. She is the expert and I'll let you know why, right? So let me bring in my wonderful doc in our Your Caring Docs fashion. So this wonderful doctor. She's a graduate from Stony Brook University. So, hello to all our New York people. I know you guys are all inundated with the snow. We're thinking about you, right? And then she did her training in family medicine at University of Massachusetts. After that, she has been able to take care of so many people in the intimacy realm, right? She's even training others who want to coach. She's a training director of the Mastermind for Coaches, and she's been doing that for almost 10 years. She's been such a successful coach. She's like, let me help you and teach you how I do what I do, right? And how I've become this wonderful, successful coach. Teaching about vulnerability, what happens if you make a mistake. It's okay. Let's get you to be the best coach that you can be. And she's also a keynote speaker. She's the best-selling author of the Uncompromising Intimacy. And she's also the host of the Intimate Marriage podcast. She is known as the Intimacy Doc. And you're like, well, why is she known as the Intimacy Doc? Because she has over 20 years of experience showing men and women how to bring pleasure and purpose into all aspects of their lives, right? She believes that when both people are free to be themselves, the relationship becomes juicy. It is nourishing and deeply satisfying. So I want you all to welcome Dr. Alexandra Stockwell, our intimacy doc. Yes. Hello. How are you?
Oh my goodness, that was the most incredible introduction. And I am feeling grand and prepared and ready to dive in.
Hey, I am here for it all. And I'm pretty sure that everyone who is watching is also here. But we want to start at the beginning because before you became the intimacy doc, you decided that you wanted to be the medical doc. So what made you decide to go to medical school?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I haven't been asked that in a long time. I have always been interested in all kinds of different things. And I actually, when I went to college, I majored in philosophy and mathematics, and I studied the great books. And I just thought, how am I ever going to commit to one profession? And I actually thought, oh, maybe I'll have an import business with furniture from Indonesia, and then I'll have a corporate position. And then, I just like life is juicy. And I saw, all these different ways. But then I was clear, okay, I'm going to narrow it down. And I went to medical school, and it was this fantastic experience that once I got there, I realized, oh, now there are so many ways to practice medicine. I haven't actually closed myself off from anything. At one point, actually, I had planned to go to South Africa right after medical school in order to I ended up having a baby instead. And so I didn't go to South Africa. But the point is that as a physician, there are so many different options that it really didn't narrow my choices at all.
Right. You ended up saying, okay, I'm going to narrow it. And then you exponentially opened up.
Exactly. Because I could go to any country, any state, work with any kind of person in any kind of venture and be doing doctorly work.
Absolutely. So you narrowed it kind of down to family medicine, which is really not really narrow because family medicine is, again, one of the specialties that takes care of everyone. So tell me, how did that go into play when you said, okay, I'll do family medicine?
I didn't enjoy family medicine. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I didn't fall in love with it in medical school. In fact, far and away, my favorite rotations in medical school were surgery and inpatient psychiatry.
What? That goes along with the philosophy major that you are. Ah.
Well, actually, this is I'm so grateful for this conversation. I'm like, Steve Jobs said that you can only connect the dots in hindsight. Like our
Mhm.
lives make sense, just not necessarily looking forward, but looking backwards. And I'm
Absolutely.
having one of those moments connecting things. One of the things that I loved so much about inpatient psychiatry
Mhm.
is how honest people are. Now,
Mhm.
in a not inpatient psychiatry context, that level of honesty is vulnerability.
Mhm.
But I would just, I was in medical school, I was in a role, I had my white coat on, I had a
Mhm.
very clearly defined place in the hierarchy. And
Yes.
I would just love it when these patients who just didn't have any of the societal filters in, I remember very clearly,
Mhm.
they make comments. They're the things you're not supposed to say. And
Mhm.
I really loved the authentic. You see that in the ER too, that
Mhm.
some of what was said was definitely not polite, but the rawness and the lack of
Mhm.
like,
Filters.
yeah, I found that super refreshing. And that's actually very similar to being in the OR when the patient is under anesthesia, there's no pretending anymore. It is the truth of what's there when the incision is made. And
Mhm.
the the truth in humanity and the excitement of surgery and inpatient psychiatry were the things that really thrilled me. But I had to be real with myself that I didn't actually want to spend the rest of my life in either of those contexts. And so the
Right.
choice of family medicine wasn't because my medical school experience was so compelling. It was really because I thought through, okay, how do I want to live? How do I want to serve? How do I want to
Mhm.
engage with people? What time do I want to get home in the evening? And those are the things that really influenced me.
Influence. Wonderful, wonderful. So now you've been doing that for a while. And then, you start to develop like, okay, I'm really good at relationships. I'm really good at communicating. Um, I've noticed that I've been doing pretty well with my own relationship. I'm married, I have my children, and then you get into this phase where you're helping others. Like, tell us, how did that come about?
Okay, well, you've painted this magnificent picture, and
Yeah.
it's not the one that I lived. It is
I
not at
love it.
all the one that I
Well,
lived.
let's pull off the veil.
Okay, so I'm in my mid 30s.
Hmm.
I've been married, I forget, let's say 10 years, but I forget exactly. I have 4 children, but at this time 3 were born.
Hmm.
I have my own small medical practice north of Boston.
Hmm.
And it's also relevant that I became the oldest person in my family. First in 2000, my father died. In 2002, my mother died. One had just turned 61, not quite 64. But they both died. So I became the oldest person in my family, and
Hmm.
I became aware that I'm hearing feedback. Do you hear that?
Yeah, I think a little bit from your mic, but that's okay. It's not
Okay.
that horrible.
Okay. Well, let me adjust. That's better. Okay.
Mhm.
So, um, of course, I worked really hard to
Mhm.
get to where I was, and I had medical school loans paid off. I did have a mortgage that wasn't paid off, but the point is that I had checked the box of
Mhm.
everything that had been on my list, and I expected to feel gratified.
Mm.
I expected to feel fulfilled. I expected to feel really clear that this was gonna be the way to live for another 4 decades.
Yes, but
But
on the
that's not
inside,
how I felt.
no.
I was prioritizing my patients over my family over myself.
Mhm.
I I had a number of different experiences where I realized I really I really want to reconnect with myself, and I wasn't burnt out, I wasn't depressed, it was not like that at the time. I didn't actually know anybody who had left medicine other than due to injury or addiction. Like, that
Mhm.
wasn't one of the things I was considering,
Mhm.
but I did know at a minimum that everything that I had done, it was a means to an end, and I wanted to learn how to enjoy things for their own sake and to
Mm.
be doing things without necessarily having a good reason.
Right, without that agenda, right?
Yeah, so I tried a lot of different things, and I realized it wasn't a scheduling issue, it was an identity issue, and
Ah.
I needed to explore that. So I went on sabbatical. I
Mhm.
created a sabbatical for myself, but in the end, I never went back to medicine. And during or when I didn't go back to clinical medicine,
Mhm.
and during that time, I gave myself permission to do things just because I felt like it, which was a completely new experience for me.
How freeing was that?
It was freeing, but it also was very confronting,
Mm.
and it showed me that I didn't actually know what I wanted.
Mm.
Like, w we can know, "Oh, we just want a break, wanna have a nap, wanna go on a great vacation," but when I slowed down enough, "Okay, I have 3 hours this afternoon. What do I want?" Well, I immediately would think, "Well, okay, I need to clean up the house, I need to
Mm.
have this meeting, I need to take care of this, I need." Okay, I put all those aside. What do I actually want? And initially, I just took a bunch of naps,
Mhm.
and it was like some part of me that had been hibernating for 15 years needed to thaw and get activated in order for me to connect with what I actually wanted from the inside out. And this is very easy to speak about,
Mhm.
but it was quite a mighty shift for me to make, and I
Mhm.
didn't really know what I was doing. I was kind of like feeling in the dark for whatever was next, trying to trust my intuition and
Mhm.
explore and know that, nothing would be a failure, but I
Mm.
could I could get it wrong and it wouldn't matter because I was really trying to connect with parts of myself that hadn't been brought into the perfectionist, become a
Mm.
physician, wife, and great mother identity.
Wow. How long did that take for you to get to that point where you were okay with what you decided to do that day? I haven't failed.
Yeah. It probably took, there are many layers of that,
Mhm.
but the first level took about 3 months.
Oh.
And if I have an unscheduled time,
Mhm.
I still kind of, this is many years later,
Mhm.
like 15, I still kind of have to have an inner dialogue. Okay, is this the time when I'm going to be practical? Am I going to make that dentist appointment and fill out
Mhm.
the DMV renewal? Is this the time when I'm going to, I don't know what? Or is this, am I really going to give this to myself?
Um, do
And
you find trying to give yourself time, are you still feeling a level of guilt with that? Or saying like,
it's not
"Oh,
guilt. For me,
no?"
it's not guilt.
Mhm.
It's actually, since we're having a conversation, we'll go there.
Yeah.
So I have 4 children.
Mhm.
My oldest is 25, my youngest is 10. When my 10-year-old was 2 years old, and so my oldest was, um, 17 maybe.
Mhm.
I'm not doing the math exactly. I'm just in the flow here.
Yeah.
I I faced one of my biggest fears
Mhm.
and came to terms with the fact that my children would be okay if I died.
Mm.
And my mother had died, and I had such profound grief.
Right.
And so I had a fear that my own children would face something like that.
Mhm.
This is all part of my response about guilt, that
Absolutely.
that I had no illusion. I wasn't suicidal. This was not the situation.
No,
But
it's just, I think it all starts when I think about it, how you started this conversation. You started it by saying you lost both parents. So I think, I think you're still in that frame of mind. Mhm.
yes, that is all very real. There's
Mhm.
nothing casual about that or like unconsciously taking it for granted that
Yeah.
I'll be around forever. I don't have that privilege. But it goes beyond that. It also has to do with feeling like I am essential and needed, and no one else can do something as well as me. And look, on the one
Mhm.
hand, that is true. There is no one who will ever mother my children even remotely as well as I do. That's just true. But it has
Mhm.
more to do with trusting them, seeing their capacity, their fullness, knowing that there are people who live through all kinds of traumas and loss. And there was something that happened where I became more loving and more free and more present in my relationship with my children after accepting that actually they don't need me the way I had thought.
Right.
This is a very subtle point, but it looks
Yeah.
like it's landing for you.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was freeing, and that's why your love was more freeing. You know, you were, so someone is saying this was so powerful. It's such a powerful, yeah, just really resonating that it's not from a place of depression. It's from a place of recognizing reality, like you said. I don't have the privilege. I'm not immortal. You know, I will be the only one that can do it this way. However, they will be okay.
Yeah, it will be hard and they will be okay. And
Hmm.
I worked it through differently for each one of the 4 of them. It wasn't like one generic bunch. It was like, how
Absolutely.
would it be for her? And
Hmm.
how would it be for him? And I trust. And this essentially honoring the reality of nature and humanity freed me from a kind of mother's guilt in a way I never would have anticipated. I didn't have that agenda. But
Wow.
I started talking about this in response to you asking me
Yeah.
about mom guilt. I have lots of things I still work on, but mom guilt isn't in my system.
Wow. I love it. This is the first time that I've ever been approached and this question has been answered that way, because you're at such peace with that part of your life. I can
I
see,
am. I
yeah.
really am, and my depth of connection with each of my children, I experience that depth of connection in its own right, and
Hmm.
I don't experience it as attached to any particular actions I'm taking.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's very easy to get confused about everything we do and conflate that with the quality of the relationship. Now, I'm not someone who believes in like you need quality time with your infant and that compensates for being away all the time. That's not my approach at all. I'm
Hmm.
very hands-on. I should say I'm in my 14th year of homeschooling. So I am very involved with my children, but I just don't feel that guilt. And that was just an unanticipated benefit of really working through another layer of my own grief.
Wonderful. You know what? So this actually leads to, I feel like this is another form of intimacy.
It is. It
Which
is.
it really is. So you are intimate. So you've formed that intimacy, that relationship with your children, and you've done it to the point that you're like, I'm free because we have that intimacy, you know? Now, this is also something that you do outside where you're helping others to form intimacy. And to also, one of the things I wanted to talk about is how would you express or describe intimacy if someone came to you? I know you do couples therapy and you coach couples. When they're coming to you with their issues, how is it that you're like, how do you describe intimacy to
I
them?
love the question. I love it so much. And one of the reasons I love it is because I think this is something that is extremely misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And it's misunderstood in two different ways. One of the ways that intimacy is misunderstood is people sometimes think it's equivalent to sex. And while it
Yes.
certainly can include sex, it is not sex per se. Like
Mm-hmm.
sex, I think of as a word to describe anatomical actions, and intimacy is so much about a feeling which is connected to those actions, but
Yeah.
certainly not restricted to it. So that's one misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, there's a misunderstanding in more new age spiritual circles
Mm-hmm.
where people love to say that intimacy means into me you see.
Oh, I've never heard of that one.
Okay, well, if you were like, I don't know what, but not as serious and not a doctor, you would have heard of that. So
Yes.
into me you see, and people get very excited about that. But I think it is another false understanding. There is some truth in that, but when we refer to intimacy as into me you see,
Mm-hmm.
it's in this subtle way a very disempowered position.
Mm.
Because if I define into me you see, if I define intimacy as into me you see, that essentially means that you need to be capable of seeing me.
Yeah.
And where am I going to go with that? So the way that I like to define intimacy is an ongoing willingness to reveal yourself, to reveal who you are in order to be seen, but you're not putting the emphasis on the other person's ability to see you because we don't ever have any control over that. What we
Mm.
do have control over, the place where we can grow and expand and become more luscious, is
Mhm.
in our capacity to reveal the truth of who we are and what we're feeling and what we want and what we're challenged by, etc. And I feel like this is a good place to weave in
Mhm.
that throughout the world, one of the most common pieces of advice that is given in terms of relationships, particularly marriages,
Mhm.
is that the key to a great relationship is you need to compromise. That
Mhm.
compromise is the name of the game.
Mhm.
And that is not true. If you want a bland, pleasant, conflict free, passion free companionship,
Mhm.
compromise will give you that. For sure, that is the right prescription.
All right.
But
However, we want the juicy relationship, so let us know how we get
yeah,
that one.
if you want, yeah, exactly what you just said, passion and dynamic evolution and yum, then I recommend what I call, and it's the name of my book, Uncompromising Intimacy. And by uncompromising, I don't mean that you always get your way or that you're exacting or a bully. What I mean is where compromise is when you withhold your own experience
Mhm.
based on what you think will be more comfortable for your partner. And it's basically prioritizing your partner's comfort. When you're uncompromising, you prioritize sharing who you are
Mhm.
and you learn, and it takes practice and it's ongoing skill building, but you learn to do that in a way that is respectful and kind and ever more calibrated so your partner can receive you. But the emphasis really is on learning how to share more of who you are rather than compromising and holding that back. So,
Wow.
uncompromising intimacy means saying, I know we go to get pizza every Thursday, but I want Thai tonight. And then it doesn't mean you have Thai, but it means you have a conversation, or it means, I know we always talked about living in the small hometown where you grew up, but actually I really want to spend more time in the city. I mean, this is
It's
true
really
in
like
the
you're right.
smallest things, like where you keep the glasses in the kitchen, to where you live, to how you want to be touched, to how often you want to be touched, to private school versus public school. Like anything that is going to arise in your soul and in your marriage, you can compromise and become resentful,
Mm,
or you can share the truth, genuinely welcome your partner's truth. If it is unpleasant or complicated, you learn how to have room and expand yourself. And
mm-hmm.
that creates juiciness and passion because
Absolutely.
we're not checking a part of ourselves at the door when we go home every night. We're bringing all of us home.
Absolutely. I love, as I think about all the different aspects that we've talked on so far, it really starts within self. And it really is bringing yourself to that person. Even when you talked about motherhood, when you talk about the intimacy part, it's not suppressing yourself. And it's like, well, if you suppress who you are, that's the part where you see, well, we're just compromising because, this is one thing that I really love, but I know that my partner might not want it. So I'm not going to say anything about it. But you never know. When you have that dialogue doesn't necessarily mean conflict. It might be something that they've never even thought about. And yes, that would be great for us to have Thai. I'm kind of sick of pizza too. I didn't know that you were sick of pizza, so I just did it because you wanted pizza. I thought you wanted pizza.
You are so right. And my husband and I, we've been married for 25 years, and now it used to be frustrating, but now I just am so entertained every time there's something he said like 20 years ago, and I've taken it to still be true. And for 18 years, it hasn't been.
Yes.
Like, I think, what was it? He said there was some food he said he didn't really like it. And so I never cooked it, even though I enjoy it. And then at one point he ordered it in a restaurant, and I said, "Are you serious?
So
I haven't
18
been
years I've
cooking
been
that."
deprived of this meal.
Yes, exactly. But I want to point to the profound observation you're making, which is that, yes, it starts with us, but it's not necessarily independent. And in fact,
Mhm.
I believe that relationship is the greatest vehicle for personal growth. And on my podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, every interview I do, I love asking couples, because relationship is the vehicle for personal growth. Like, what have you learned about yourself as a result of being married to your spouse? Because people are very quick to think, oh, what did I learn about him or her? But like, what
No,
did you learn about yourself through being in this marriage? And so I'm just like enjoying and agreeing with the observation you've made.
one of the other things that I love that you did on your podcast is that you have conversations on difficult topics that arise in relationships. Because as we said, not all relationships are smooth. Now, there are times when, and I'm pretty sure some people who are listening to this, they're probably some are in great relationships, some want to be in great relationships, some have been hurt, and they're wondering, how do I bring myself back to that? If you've had a if you're in a marriage and someone might have stepped out of that marriage, I mean, there's a loss right there that has happened. You know what I mean? You have, or if you are, like, I love the part that you were talking to someone about, like when someone is stepped out, even it doesn't have to be physically, it could be emotionally, like when they stepped out pornography, like, and they're become addicted to that and then they're having to come back. Like, what is the advice that you have for someone who's listening right now and they want to bring that relationship back? Or they want to now no longer be afraid to step into a new relationship. Let's try to help those people.
Okay, fantastic. So I have two suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
They're very different, but they're both really impactful. So if you're in the situation just described, just start with whichever one speaks to you.
Okay.
So in the scenarios that you've described, regardless of whether someone is still with the person or with a different person or not with somebody, one of the really important things is to manage your own resentment.
Wonderful.
And one of my favorite ways to do that
Mm-hmm.
is to write a letter to the person who has hurt you.
Mm.
Now, you're never going to send the letter.
Right.
The person's never going to read it, but there is something so powerful. It imprints your whole nervous system when you actually, this is another form of being uncompromising, by the way, where you actually express the truth and the fullness of your experience, your anger, your pain, like whatever it is. And sometimes I've had clients where I've said, okay, write him a letter every single day for the next 30 days. Once you've written it, this isn't something to go back and reread or learn from or memorialize. It's about expressing it.
Yes.
And it's just totally different if you do it directed to the person. There's so much benefit without them ever hearing it. In fact, if they were to read it, it might cause harm.
Right.
But it helps you shed it and express yourself. And actually, I've had a few clients who, had a 10-year-long resentment. And, or if they're doing it with their mother, for example, it's longer than that. And when I say write the letter, it's very confronting and it often takes a while to be able to express without censoring. Even though someone is like obsessed with this hurt, to actually shift and give yourself permission to express it is a big deal. So that's one strong recommendation. Whoever has hurt you, go ahead and write them a letter and tell them what an ass they are, but don't send it.
Right.
That's point number one. Not first, just I'm naming it point number one.
Just one.
And one of the options. And on the other hand, I'll say, one of the most underutilized, transformational, easy to implement things is to cultivate curiosity. Because most of, maybe all of the kinds of scenarios you described, we know about our experience, but we're very close to what is going on for the other person.
Yeah.
And this is a very high order play, like it takes practice, but one of the most profound things you can do in a fight or in a conflict is to take a breath and ask the other person a question. And I don't mean the kind of question where you're like, well, don't you think? No, I mean an open-ended question like, will you explain how you see it that way? That doesn't mean you agree. It doesn't mean you're going to agree after they've said it. But when we have curiosity, it creates more connection, more collaboration, more creativity. And I gave the example of being in a conflict, but one of the most exciting times for using creativity is in, let's say, a marriage which is to whatever degree a little stale. And when I guide one or both of them to just ask some questions. It's like the thaw comes and things are juicier because look, think of the experience of being in love. The
Mhm.
experience of being in love, you are filled with curiosity. Where is that scar from? And what did you want to be when you grew up? And have you ever wanted to live in Singapore? And
Mhm.
what are your favorite books? And what did you wear to prom? I mean, I'm just making up things,
Yeah,
but
no, but you're right. There's a lot of curiosity, especially during those flooded emotional times in the beginning where,
we can't get enough. It's like
oh,
we're hungry to know the
there's
other
a
person
reason people are
more.
on the phone, or at least when they used to be on the phone, for hours during those first couple, right? Um,
Totally. And then there is something so beautiful when things become familiar, things become safe. We can finish our partner's sentences. We don't ask because we know. But without giving up the safety and the familiarity and the depth that comes, we have to bring back the curiosity.
mhm.
So if someone is single, then turn all that curiosity on yourself. What are you actually experiencing? What's another way you could do that? If you typically wear solid colors, what would it be like to wear a print? You're not committed to having a closet full of prints, but like there's a playfulness in curiosity. And if you're with a partner, everything I've just said applies as well. And
Mhm.
you can direct it to the other person. But there are two rules to add if you're going to be curious with your spouse. One is that whatever answer he or she gives to the questions you ask, you
Mhm.
have to be a yes.
Ah.
In other words, you don't even have to like what they say, but you have to be a yes that they're answering. Because
Mhm.
if you ask a question, this especially comes up. This is not a starter question. So, anyone
Yeah.
listening, don't start with this, but you might say, like, do you have any sexual fantasies you've never told me? And then you hear an answer, and your first response is, I'm never doing that.
What?
That is
You
not
were fans of
curiosity. That is information gathering followed by judgment.
not
Curiosity.
good.
Yeah. So, in fact, if you don't like the answer, the best response is, I'm so glad you told me that. I didn't know before.
Hmm.
And
Love
you
it.
can buy yourself as much time as you need to
Yes, you
think
will.
through whatever else, but you want to make it so that it's safe to share what's real, because if you make it unsafe,
You're
then
closed off.
that's right.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that if one of you is watching this and the other one isn't, and you don't have a marital culture where you ask one another questions, and then you ask a question, you might get like a grunt, you might get an actual answer, but what you're dying for is that he or she asks you also.
Ah,
And so don't wait for that question. Just go ahead and give your answer without being asked, as a way to uplevel the culture and the way you engage with one another.
love it. Love it. Like we said, these aren't opening questions for relationships. These are, let's bring that juice. Because one of the things too that I recognize as we're talking, and we also have to keep in mind, is that relationships, especially if you've been in it for a while, the partner has changed, but you might
Yes.
not real. And so
Yes.
this allows you to get to know them again for where they are right now, not for where they were when you started dating the 10 years, 15 years ago. Like we said, oh, I didn't know you liked that. Well, I made it for you 15 years ago. You didn't like it. But now,
Exactly.
so we have to also respect that our partners, there's a dynamic shift that goes along during relationships. And this is a way to bring it back and get to know the new person and to bring, like we said, that juice back into it.
Yes. And as we evolve, it
Yes.
can be frustrating when they haven't noticed it.
Hmm.
And it's our job to share that.
Absolutely.
But these questions, they can be deeper ones implied in what you've just said. They can also be whimsical. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you could have dinner with any celebrity alive or dead, who would it be and what would you ask them? Or if you could be president of a country, what policies would you implement? Like it can be, there's an energy in the curiosity and the
Yeah.
quality of attention. So sure, you can ask about sexual fantasies, you can ask about deeper career yearnings, but you can ask, if
If
you
you
were
could be
going
a
to be an
superhero.
animal. Yeah, if you're going to be a superhero, which one would you be and what great deed would you like to do?
Yes, absolutely. You can really make it whimsical and then have fun. I think that's the whole part. You're getting to know that person again, the person that you're with, that you see every day. It brings a lot of fun back into it. I can definitely see that. Alrighty. So now we've like really delved into this, but I have to bring it back because a lot of our listeners are saying, whoa, this is just so awesome. I wonder, how does Dr. Stockwell participate in self-care? What does she do for self-care? So let us know.
Oh, my favorite quote about
Mhm.
self-care, and one of my favorite quotes altogether, I'm not going to say it verbatim,
No.
but it's
Mhm.
from Brianna Wiest, I think you say her name is. Anyway, that the real definition of self-care is creating a life which is so good that you don't need to take a break in order to take baths and eat chocolate cake. Like
Oh,
my
okay, I
my
need to absorb that one. I love it.
yeah, so my fundamental self-care
Hmm.
is to not need to compartmentalize it. It's like I don't want the erotic energy in my marriage to be restricted to certain hours in the bedroom. I want it to feel juicy all day. And likewise,
Hmm.
like my self-care is in how I touch myself when I wash my face, which I'm going to do anyway.
Hmm.
So is am I going to treat my skin like the kitchen counter? Am I going to treat it like my face?
Yeah.
And my self-care is in choosing fabrics to wear that
Hmm.
feel good so I can give you some more specifics, but I really aspire
It's
to have self-care to be
flowing throughout.
an attitude
Oh, I love it.
rather than a specific action.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to have to incorporate that. My self care routine is the attitude of me constantly doing things that makes me not want to have to take a break to do things because
Yes,
it's flowing through me
exactly.
all the
It's
time.
doing things so I don't need a break to do them, and it's
Yeah,
doing the things I'm gonna do anyway
I
in a way that feels self-honoring.
love it. Love it. Alrighty. So now we're on to one of my favorite questions that I ask all of my docs. So, if you weren't a doctor, what would you be?
Well, in a way, I could cheat with that because I'd
We're
be
not
a
going to talk about
relationship and
intimacy
intimacy
stuff.
coach,
No.
but yes, okay. What would I be? I think that I would want to bring emotional intelligence education and gardening into public education throughout the country. And the reason I hesitated is I don't know what profession that is, and I don't know
I know.
what platform
That's
from
okay.
which to do it, but
It's that
my
one step.
greatest wish is that
Mhm,
all children have emotional intelligence training and
mhm.
some gardening in their childhood.
That's a wonderful one. I haven't had, so that's a form of teaching. So I've had some teachers. So you'll be my second. And then this gardening, you'll be my third gardener.
Really?
Yes, my third doc who loves gardening. So we have Dr. Shiri Chad. So
Mm.
she loves gardening. And then Dr. Edie Allen, he loves gardening too. So yes, you're my third. So that's a wonderful, wonderful answer. I love asking that question. I always get to.
It's fantastic, and, we all should be thinking these questions.
Mhm.
It's getting curious.
It is getting curious. And you find out it's so interesting because whenever I get the answer to this question, it usually ties back to something else that they've done before that they've never thought about. So this is wonderful. So I've had a fantastic time talking to you, Dr. Stockwell. And I know that there are people, and I've seen a lot of people leaving comments within there. We have comments from those who are on LinkedIn, we have comments from those who are on Facebook. So I know people are curious in finding out how can I get in contact with the intimacy coach, this intimacy doc, the one who can help me to revitalize my relationship with myself or even with my partner. Let them know. Where can they find you?
Well, come join me at the Intimate Marriage Podcast, and you can find everything you would ever be looking for at the intimatemarriagepodcast.com.
Yes. Wonderful, wonderful. It's a wonderful podcast. And as I said, I've gone through some of what she's mentioned on the podcast, but there's so much more, so much more. All the different ways to delve into relationship intimacy and getting to know yourself, your partner, and yourself within that marriage, right? Alrighty, everyone. Thank you so much for taking this time out with us. We hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, because I was smiling throughout this entire podcast interview. So this is absolutely one of our docs who care, Dr. Alexandra Stockwell. I look forward to releasing this wonderful podcast so you guys can hear it. You can find this wherever you do listen to our podcast, especially on Apple, right? Do not forget to leave a 5-star review because I know this is very juicy. We've learned so much about Dr. Stockwell, and we've learned how to live self-care, right? Just the way that you don't even want to have to stop to take it because you're doing it all day, every day. Alrighty, guys, Docs Who Care podcast on Apple. I will see you guys next time for another wonderful episode. Thank you all. Bye-bye.